True story. 8 years ago, I ordered a custom bow from a reputable bow manufacturer all the way across the country. We talked a couple times, talked about woods and styles, and then we settled on what I was looking for, gave him my specs, and paid my down payment. 7 months later, the bow was ready. I paid in full. He shipped me the bow. I hated it the minute it came out of the box. It didn't look good. It didn't feel right. And it didn't shoot good. I ended up selling that bow 3 weeks later for $250 less than I paid for it. I took a bath on that, and my wife was not happy. Enter Blackwidow Bows. They have a test drive program. If you're even remotely interested in shooting a Blackwidow bow, give those guys at the shop a call. Talk to them. Tell them what you're looking for. They're going to give some really good guidance. They're going to have some really great advice. They're going to have a bow that's close to your specs on the demo rack, if not right on. You're going to run your card. You're going to pay for shipping both ways. You're going to pay for insurance both ways, and you're going to get to shoot the bow for a week. You might decide you don't want to shoot a Blackwidow bow, and that's cool. Send it back. But you might decide you want to order one. You want to make some tweaks to get it just what you want. I wish I had that option 8 years ago. If you're thinking about a Blackwidow bow, give those guys a call. If nothing else, they're fun to talk to. Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to this week's episode of the Stickbow Chronicles, brought to you by Blackwidow Bows. I'm Rob Patuto. I got my little man today helping me with the intro because Blake was busy. What's going on, buddy?
Nothing. How are you?
Pretty tired, but cool having you help me out with an intro. It's been a long time. You used to be a squeaky little kid, voiced kid. I think you've done a few intros with me, but it's been a long time. Now you...
it has.
Yeah,
it's been too long.
Now you got like a 13 shoe. You smell funny. You got a deep voice, and you eat a lot of food. That happened quick.
Yeah.
Yeah. Turkey season's coming up, bud. We had a great turkey hunt last year. I think I'd like to do that again. We're backpacked in, and you shot a bird. That was cool.
That was a fun hunt.
That was an awesome hunt, man. Laying in the tent, listening to those birds on roost, and kind of.
That was cold for me because I had two small sleeping bags.
Yeah. We've upgraded your sleeping bag since then, and yeah. We listened to those birds all night. Got up in the morning. I felt like we were running super late. We got out of the tent. And I don't know. I think we went about 300 yards, and you smacked a big old mature tom, and went back to the tent and had breakfast. That was awesome.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, I hope we get to do that again. So this week's episode, we've got a packed house on this episode. We got, of course, Blake. Got Cody, Greenwood, and Aron Snyder. Both of them have done extensive testing on Blackwidow's new carbon limbs. So we've got them, and we also have Toby and Myles, and we're just going over all of Cody's data, and Aron's breaking it down in layman terms. So it was good team effort to get this one out there. And I've had some questions about what I've posted a couple times on Instagram, what I was shooting, and I've said several times it was under a 500 grain arrow, but it's not. I weighed it, and no, I'm shooting a Black Eagle Rampage out of it. I think it's like 30 and a half inch, something like that. It's coming in at 512 grains, using the iron will collars and hit inserts. Man, I'm digging it. Oh, and the other thing was string. A couple of people had asked me about the string. Alan Schaefer over at 10 Range Strings. I had him build me a 8125 And there was, it's working out good. I really appreciate him getting that out to me, and he did a great job. Zero stretch on that thing from the time I braced it up till now, probably 200, 250 arrows. So appreciate him doing that. It's awesome. Buddy, you got anything you want to say to the masses? There is quite a few more listeners than there used to be when you got on here. All right, buddy. Well,
I was not ready for that.
You what?
I was not ready for that.
I know. You wanted me to tell you everything I was going to say, but Dad just flies by the seat of his pants. So.
I get that now.
Okay.
I've only been here 3 times.
Well, thanks, buddy. Big thanks to the sponsors, Kifaru International, Backwards Grind Coffee Company, Selway Archery, The Footage Shaft, and, of course, Blackwidow Bows. I hope you all have a great week. If you like what we do here at the Stickbow Chronicles, make sure and give us a follow, whatever platform you're listening on, and please leave us a 5-star review and tell your friends. That's all I got. You got anything else, bud?
No. Thank you for having me on.
You bet. Roger out. All right, so we got a packed house tonight. We got Toby and Myles from Blackwidow. We got Cody, Greenwood, Aron Snyder, and, of course, Blake Hunter. What's going on, folks?
Hi, guys.
Hey.
Hello.
We are here. We're here tonight. We're gathered here tonight to talk about the new carbon limbs that you guys have come out with down there in Blackwidow. Blake and I just got ours. Blake, you got yours a few days prior to me. And Cody, how long have you and Aron been messing with them?
Aron got his before I had mine. I've had mine for about 2 months. I tested them for 6 weeks straight.
Man, you looking all.
Yeah, I probably have mine for 4 or 5 months now. 4 months.
Did you have them before they even created them?
I will leave that up to Toby to answer.
If he didn't have the first one, it was one of the first. I sent him and
Randy
and Denny all one close to kind of the same time.
What Toby? What was the catalyst? What pushed you guys over the edge to try the carbon?
I can answer that by saying 2 fat guys bugging the hell out of you.
Yeah, pretty much. But no, I mean, there's always been people ask about it, and there's always been a market for it. And I don't know, we just never dealt with it much. And yeah, basically Randy, he called me and wanted to know if I'd build him a set, Randy Cooley, and he said, I've got the carbon. He wanted to know if we'd build it. I said, yeah, send it here. We'll settle in.
Whoa, I think Aaron's taking a leak. What are you doing, man?
No, I'm good. Nothing.
And
So, was that wind?
Why's it got to be me taking a leak? I'm just sitting here.
It got all windy.
It's definitely him.
You know what it is?
When his response is, why has it got to be me?
Cody's a pissphiliquist, and he made it sound like it was me.
I think it was you. It's not hard to deduce. We can see everybody else.
yeah, for sure.
Dying.
Start over on that or start where I left off?
We just roll with it here, man.
Yeah. So Randy got sent you some carbon.
Well, he was going to, and wherever he was getting it, it fell through. He couldn't get it, and so in the meantime, I had made some phone calls and got some carbon of our own. So Randy just said build it out of that, and it kind of just went from there. To be honest, I sent Randy that set that I'd build, and sent Denny a set, sent Aron some, and it's just kind of escalated, and they've really gone over well. I mean, we didn't have a catalog this year. It's basically just been word of mouth and social media But man, they've really taken off.
Well, it's funny. I posted that, I don't know, today or yesterday or something, that we were all going to get together and talk about it. And I got more than a few messages. Hey, ask Toby when my bow's ready. So it's going to be a blanket question from everybody. When is my bow going to be ready?
Just as soon as I'm done with it.
There you go. Well, hey, I was going to start off because I'm probably the least technical guy. And I got my limbs about 3 days ago, and I got it strung up, braced it at 8 3/4. I was shooting a 350, got it dialed in, shooting a 350 Rampage. It's 490 grain total arrow weight, 52 pounds at 28. And my first shot, I noticed how quiet it was. I mean, it wasn't something I was looking for. It was just first shot. It's like, dang, that was quiet. I probably put about 100 arrows through it. I paper tuned it, and I had one fletched and one bare shaft. And the few things that I noticed, right, like I said, right off the bat, was it was quiet. I ended up shooting a fletched arrow and a bare shaft arrow out to 28 yards, which I haven't done in a long time. And the other thing I noticed was after 100 arrows, I had less, I always struggle with shooting left. I had less left shots. So I don't know how that plays into the scheme of things, but wanted to throw my experiences out there.
No, I mean, that's pretty much along the lines. I mean, I guess I'll go next since I'm the second newest guy to have these. I'll add, me and Rob have not talked to Cody much about what his testing showed, just so we can try and be as objective as possible. I mean, I immediately noticed how quiet it was. That's, I think, the number one thing I noticed. And also I noticed the same, that when I pluck the string, or I have a shot that I'm like, I know when I let go of the string is bad. I'm not missing as much as I usually would. So a pluck at, 30 or 35 yards instead of being 10 inches left or whatever may only be 5 to 6 inches left. The limbs are definitely really quiet. It's the quietest bow I've had. I'm shooting about 10 grains per pound, so nothing super heavy, and it is very, very, very quiet. It seems to be really, really forgiving. Those are the two main things that I've noticed, and I'm sure that G10 helps it be super dead in the hand, but it is literally vibration free. There's no vibration at all. And I mean, that's what I've seen so far is it. I just hardly ever have any left or right misses with it. And I've got, I don't know, probably 300 arrows through it so far. And I'm loving it so far. So I'll kind of lead that into Cody and Aron, but that's what I've noticed to this point. Super forgiving, super stable, and really, really quiet.
Cody, you want me to handle the left and right thing a little bit, or you want to handle it?
Yeah, no, I want you to go all the way through yours. Yeah. I think,
okay. Go ahead.
I think it's important to restate what Blake said. We haven't gotten together and shared experiences versus technical notes, because this is going to be really interesting as we get into the quantitative stuff.
Good Lord, that's a big word, Cody.
It was impossible to share because Aron refused to give me his email, and I can verify that.
I couldn't quantitate it, or whatever word you just used. Quantify, strategery, Bosnian. What was the symbolism with that? So the thing that I found initially, which is exactly what you guys were talking about as far as a pluck or a bad shot, is the recovery because of the horizontal or torsional stability is significantly better. I would say twice as good as a standard limb, but and Cody can break it down less redneck than me, but when you take a shot and you pluck a string and you don't have the torsional or horizontal stability, it takes longer for the limb to recover than it does with a carbon limb. So if you for me, it's slow motion video and a camera that takes 20 to 30 frames a second. When if you fire that standard widow limb, which there's nothing wrong with those, but if you fire a standard widow limb and a standard carbon limb, the only thing you're going to see on a perfect shot is the shaking or the vibration. It just recovers a little bit faster with the carbon. But when you make a bad shot or pluck the string, that limb recovers before, when I say recovers, meaning where the limb tip would twist a little bit if you pluck it, because of that carbon and the horizontal or torsional stability. By the time that limb is done firing forward or finishing its power stroke, so to speak, that limb tip has recovered much faster with a carbon limb, which means you don't get as many lefts and rights, specifically lefts if you're right-handed. That's generally where, unless you're collapsing, that's generally where people are going to see it from the pluck. With a right-handed shooter, you'll miss left. And it also causes difference in the paradox of the arrow. When you fire an arrow through a shooting machine, it's perfect every time. Well, when a human fires it, if it's a perfect release, you're great. When it's bad, that's where the carbon really shines. And so a shot, especially in a hunting situation where you crap your pants a little bit, you pluck the string, whatever the case, that limb is going to recover, or your groups will be half the size they were, or at least, from my findings, 40% better. Because if you are shooting perfect, like an Instagram group, it doesn't really count, right? If you're shooting good that day, everyone's going to shoot good. When you shoot bad or you're having a little off day, usually, let's say at 30 yards, you're going to have 3 to 4 arrows in the dot, and you may have 2 to 3 arrows way outside of the dot. When you start graphing that and charting it with the carbon limbs, your group is going to shrink, for me, 40%. And it's not that it helps the good shots that much. It's not like a miracle cure. The good shots are always the good shots. It is going to help the bad shots suck into that group tighter, because it is not as drastic of a reaction of the limb as it would be with a standard limb when you have the carbon. So for me, initially, the bow is quieter. That's great. Initially, 3 to 4 feet per second, 2 to 3 feet per second, ancillary benefit. I wasn't looking for these limbs for speed. It was more, again, the shootability of it. And so when I shot these, I had a couple thousand arrows through them pretty easily. I had a G10 riser and I had a wood riser. So I was able to kind of screw around, bounce back and forth between the two. The limb actually carries it a lot more than you would think. The G10 helps as far as being dead in the hand, but it's just about the same, a slight difference with the wood riser. So that was good to see for people asking the question. So I can't say it. The only bad thing about this is I was one of the only people that had the limb, and I've lent it to 4 people now. To give you an idea, every person I've lent the bow to has, Matt Fugnes was the recent guy. He's ordering immediately. He was ordering the bow. When you get something that is this high demand and it shoots that good, it kind of sells itself. But it was an overwhelming amount of people pestering the crap out of me about the bow. And so what was good to see is it wasn't me with new bow aura or whatever you want to call it. The moment I'd send the limbs and the riser to somebody to try, they would order it immediately after. And I'm like, okay, well, it obviously isn't just me rubbing, some funk on it, thinking that I'm shooting better than I am. And pretty much everyone I've talked to, and I haven't talked to Cody very much, especially widow shooters that have shot widows for years, was a night and day difference in noise, shootability. It recovers faster. So that is not just guessing. That's also, like I said, off of slow motion video and photography, being able to see those limbs recover that much faster. That's my spiel.
Toby, you got anything to jump in on?
No, I've learned more already than I even knew myself.
So I got a quick kind of a question. So when I said I noticed less lefts. Now is it as I'm thinking it through, it wouldn't just be plucking the string, right? Could it be hand torque on the riser that it's showing less effects to as well?
Anything that's going to affect that limb, meaning if you torque the bow differently as you get tired, then that limb is going to react differently, but it's also going to recover faster. And so, anything, generally it's a pluck, but the grip, it could definitely be that too. But mostly when I see a guy shooting under pressure with an animal in front of him or a tournament, the grip, other than maybe if he's, death gripping the riser, the grip's usually the same. It's the release hand or the release or the pluck that is really like the noticeable thing, but it will help for both. Yeah. Or that's been my findings.
All right, I'll zip it now. Now we lost Cody. He fell over or something. There he is.
No, I mean, that's good to hear, because that's gone along with, and like I wanted to, I know Cody stressed it, but none of us have really talked with each other before this. So this is pretty interesting that we all kind of pretty much have the same things to say. I mean, it's, the way I test that is back at my point on distance. That's if I'm going to get a little target panicky or a little plucky, that's where it's going to happen is when I'm holding the point right on what I want to hit. And I could just, I know as soon as I let go of the string, if that arrow is going to go left or not. And it seems to have really minimized those left misses a lot. And I had my theories on why that was, but I'm glad to hear Aron kind of go through it, because that's pretty much the same thing I've seen.
All right, Big C, I think you're up.
Before we get into the detail, Blake, what's your average 300 right now?
300 round?
Yeah.
Oh, I haven't shot one in a while. I mean, generally I'm, 260 right in there.
260. Rob, where are you at?
I shot like 3 this year. 238.
Where you at?
What's that?
238.
Yeah.
Aron, where are you at?
I would rather not mention that number because no one's going to believe it anyway. So it's good enough. Above 270.
A 1.
Okay. So
Aron shoots a 1.
That's what we're looking for. So we should have. Did everyone see the same improvement in groups other than Aron?
I can't really say yet. I haven't put enough arrows through it, but I it's been noticeable. Stump shooting today, and the first day on the target, I was noticing less lefts.
I guess the point I'm going to try to make is as people try to infer what their experience is going to be from listening to everybody on this call, the average person doesn't shoot 270, 260, or even 230. I'm averaging around in the high 250s right now. We're all going to have, I didn't have, and Myles asked me this when I presented this to them at Widow. I couldn't shoot the difference at 20 yards. When I back up to 40, I could shoot the difference. To hear Aron say that he could put an exact percentage on his improvement makes sense if he's shooting on the higher end of that 300, because the level of variation in his personal shot is smaller than ours. So anything the bow brings to the table will show up. So if a person's out there who's shooting a 14-inch group at 20 yards, they may not see a 40% reduction in their group. I just want to level set to make sure people don't call up Toby or Roger and say, hey, I didn't see, a 40% reduction in my groups. We're all going to have different experiences based on our own abilities. And there's pretty good distribution here of shooting ability to assess these, but I think that's important to point out.
Let me chime in a little bit with that, because Cody brings up a good point. So people understand the 40% at 20 yards. I will say the highest score I ever shot on a 20-yard target. Now, keep in mind, I have not had the bow in my hand in a month and a half, almost 2 months, because I've been letting people borrow it. I shot a 288 in a league night with people watching, so it wasn't, bro science or whatever. I shot a 288 with that Widow on a 1 spot. Now, I've shot 280s a few times. What usually kills me is that 2 or 3 plucks in the course of a 300 round that'll drop me off into a 2 or 3 ring. I'll usually have 1 or 2 of those, maybe 3. You have to figure if you're if I'm going from a 2 or a 3 to a 5 or an X or a 4 or a 5, and I do that 2, 3, or 4 times in a tournament or in a league night, Cody's bringing up a very good point. If you're spraying arrows all over, it's going to be harder to quantify. For me, I knew at that, when I finished that night was, okay, I still had a 4 or maybe cutting a 5-4, but it was the same shot that after I shot it was like, look up at the air and like, my God, what did I just do? It just recovered. It was just a little bit closer, a couple inches difference at 20. That 40% gain is literally those 1 or 2 bad shots. If you're shooting 6 arrows at 40 yards, and I can generally keep it in a pie plate, but 1 or 2 of those shots are touching the edge of the pie plate or just out, on average. It's very easy if you're marking your arrows to see that 40% difference measuring it. And it's just the difference of a pluck, that 1 or 2 where it's just a little bit outside of the plate. And that makes it hopefully easier for people to understand where that 40% comes from. It's a mean, median, and mode. It's not my major group. It's my flyers that suck in.
And that's where I noticed the big difference at 35 and 40 yards is where I noticed a difference. Like I said, my miss at that distance is going to be 10 inches left generally. On average, if I pluck it and do something goofy, and that shrinks down quite a bit, it seems like. Cody, you want to go ahead and get into the first slide here?
Yeah, so we can dive in real fast. Not everyone's looking at the slides, but to walk through what this study entailed, because I'm standing as close to a line that I won't ever cross right now that I have since I've started Tradlab. We've got a manufacturer on the line, and we're on a podcast, which that manufacturer is a sponsor of. But Widow didn't ask me to build them an infomercial. They asked me to assess these limbs. The exact data that I'm presenting to this group right now is the exact same data that I presented to Widow when I went to Missouri and put it in front of them. It hasn't been modified at all. So we're not showing only the good or only the bad here. We're giving exactly what happened. And I'm going to be right dead center in the facts and the numbers. And then if there's any opinion or how it applies in the real world, it come from these other guys. But I don't have any biases. I'm not sponsored by Widow. And if there was something bad, I would have been the first one to present it to them. And actually, that's more than likely what they were looking for versus me telling them how great they were to make sure that they were going to be solid. The first step and what you're looking at on this slide, for the people that can't see the graph, I'm sure we'll have this deck posted somewhere for people to look at. But on the very first slide, it says measurement error analysis. And this is me just asking myself, and to me, this was the most impressive slide for myself from Widow. It wasn't the speeds or anything else. It's what's on this slide. And I got real excited. I went to Widow and I presented, and Toby should play poker. He just stood there. I'm like, okay, this isn't as exciting as I thought it would be, but I'm pretty excited to be a part of this. But what I did, I had several different, actually I had 1, 2, 3, 4 sets of PMA limbs. I had to set at 41 at 28, 39 at 28, 46 at 28, and 46 at 28. And what you see me doing here is I'm just measuring the mass of each limb. The very first thing I do in any study is make sure that I can measure what I'm about to study. And believe it or not, it's harder than you think to measure what you're about to study. The next thing I try to ask myself is the measure going to be meaningful? Like, will people be able to infer from my measure? For example, the first step I took, I put a sensor on my PMA and I shot it, and it recorded my float. And I overlaid, I think, 2 or 3 ends into this target that showed my float. And I took screenshots of that and sent it to Myles. I said, these limbs are amazing. And I suffer from enthusiasm. And Myles wrote back and said, I don't know what the hell I'm looking at. So I said, okay, that's not going to be part of the study, because the measure showed that the limbs everyone's talking about torsional stability, but the limbs were actually less sensitive to finger tension variation. And my float was more consistent due to that, because of I don't know the word, but instead of torsional, it's just the forward and back consistency of it, which you would think would be really cool. So if I weren't trying to inflate this, I would just show that submetric, and I would try to convince everyone how great these limbs were. but the arrow has to hit the target for them to be great. And what you couldn't see was, or what you could see in that also, is my flinch right before I let go of the arrow after every shot. So whenever I told Myles I can't shoot the difference at 20, it's not because I couldn't see an improvement, just like I showed him in those graphics. It's because my variation was greater than the improvement at that length. But at the same time, I knew that measure wouldn't allow us to infer. We wouldn't learn much from it. And the best example I have for a definition is like if you were going to study lethality, you would define a pass through. I mean, you'd think that'd be simple, but would you count a pass through if the arrow fell out of the deer as it ran away, or would you only count it as a pass through as it goes through? These are the tough things you have to kind of define in a study. In a term of measure, the same pass through concept. How do you measure penetration when you get more pass throughs than you do non-pass throughs? Pass through isn't binary, right? You're going to convert it to a percentage. Well, you either stop and realize you're not working on the biggest source of the problem, or you go to bigger animals so you can not get pass throughs and you can actually measure something. So I had to take several passes through this scientific method to make sure I was measuring something that was meaningful and something that, well, at the same time I could measure, if that makes sense. So it's not the statistics, it's not the graphs, it's the critical thought that we all put into this and who we're trying to convey it to. But I said all of that to kind of come back to the very first step here is me just trying to determine if I could measure this. And I was amazed, and people, and I know I'm going to catch flack for being on this podcast with the manufacturers being on here, because people already point out that I favor Toby and Widow and a few others. But when you recommend bows to people, you become part of the customer service network if something goes wrong, and you try to focus on the manufacturers that have less variation within bow and between bow. And what this actually shows is my ability to measure, which you see in red is where there's measurement error. So I have a error analysis of around 0.2 of an ounce. And Blake, if you go to that next slide, it'll show it a little bit better in graphs. This is the mass of each limb that you can see in each graph.
When you say mass, are you talking physical mass?
Yeah, like how much it weighs.
Okay. Like I said, I'm like the least technical guy on here. So
no, that's good.
We're talking about weight.
Yeah. If I say something that doesn't make sense, then I think those are all good questions. And here you can see side by side what was impressive to me. And it's the fact that there's not a lot of variation here, not just within pair. If you look at between the pairs of limbs, there's very, very little, very few people could pour a glass of freaking water that had this least amount of variation. And these guys are gluing up limbs. So when you look at that and you see 11.7 versus 11.9, that's 0.2 of an ounce of variation, which is crazy when you think that these are layers and they're layers of adhesive. And I was really impressed by that. And it actually made my job a little bit more difficult, because now I've got to be extremely precise, right? I can't just take this halfway. I've got to really try to drive to a higher level of precision. And this mass variation, whether you're talking about glass or carbon, is very, very tight. And this isn't normal for bowyers. I tell people most of the time you can expect 3 to 6 feet per second variation from bow to bow for a lot of manufacturers. There's only a few manufacturers where you don't see that variation, and you can go see those metrics on there. I got a PA that was made 2 years prior to the PMA, and they're within 1 or 2 feet per second of one another. Here you see me studying several different PMA limbs, and we can kind of see the variation is very, very tight here. The other signal that jumped out at me right away, if you just squint your eyes and glance at this, there's a lot of people that think the heavier the limb, the more heavier draw of the limb, the more mass that it has. And really, you don't see a lot of that here. But what you do see stand out night and day, without just moving any further, is there's a lot less mass in 46-pound limbs versus 39-pound glass limbs or black and white ebony limbs. Do you guys see that? The limbs on the left, 46 at 28 carbons.
Yeah,
They're
so
rough.
it's, go ahead, Cody.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to kind of give people a visual here. The carbon limbs is a 46 at 28 are 10.8 ounces to 10.9. And then the equivalent limbs with black and white ebony veneers, 46 at 28 again, are 12.3 to 12.2 ounces.
Right. So it's just really good control quality management on their part. And I was hoping to get to see behind the curtains when I was there, and I did slip back there and get to see a few of their processes. And I walk factories for a living, and I can see where this comes from whenever you look at the shop. But when we look at the carbon, you see an actual draw weight of 44.3 because Myles likes to mess with me and make my job 4 times harder than it should be. And then the black and white ebony glass that he built right beside it was 45.8 because now I got to levelize absolutely everything for speed instead of just having a straight shot run. Really appreciate that. From there, you can see the delta in draw length is 1.5 pounds or 3.28%. But
And
the
delta is difference.
Yeah. The difference.
Just to clarify.
No, thank you. Yep. The difference between the two is 3.28%. Again, this is for people that are going to say, well, maybe the mass would be slower or it would have an effect, but the limb mass improvement is 2.9 ounces or 11.9%. And to make that more practical, I gave examples of what weight I round up, but I give examples of what weighs 3 ounces. They took 30 pennies worth of weight or mass out of their limbs, or 3 AA batteries, or 3 number 2 pencils, or 18 sheets of copy paper. That's what that means there. And that's not insignificant. And so whenever you hear the hunters of the group say, the first thing I notice is less vibration. Well, the less mass you have out toward the end of the limbs past your tapers, the less variation or the less vibration you're going to have, and less sound you're going to have. And to take 30 pennies worth of mass out of those limbs is, and you can see it in the bar graph, it's night and day. So if mass or the lighter mass killed animals, I could convert this to a percentage and say, hey, you're going to 11.9% better lethality here, but I won't do anything like that because it doesn't draw the right picture. But you can see an improvement in mass. And this is where I believe the sound improvement comes from. I didn't shoot these off a G10 riser. I can only imagine that thing is dead in the hand. I shot this off my P&A, which is black and white ebony. So I'm sure the experience that Blake, Aron, is yours. Are you shooting off wood or G10?
G10. Well, I have both, but I've been shooting it off G10.
Do you feel a difference between G10 and wood?
There is a difference. It's not as significant as I thought it would be. Meaning, if I put wood limbs on a wood riser, wood limbs on a G10 riser, there's definitely a difference. If you put the carbon limbs on each, there's not as much of a difference.
Okay, that's interesting. So that's the measurement system in and of itself, and the first observation that I had that was meaningful in terms of the direct difference between the two. If you go to the next slide, do you guys have any questions here? Do you think there's any, more importantly, are there going to be any points of clarification as people look at this that they're going to ask that we can address right now?
Maybe float for some people. Float, what he means when he says float is just how much he's moving while he's holding. That some people may not know exactly what you meant there, but
there's the sensor you put on the bow and it shows I'm not going to have it in a graphic in here. It didn't mean anything to Myles, so I'm like, all right, that's not going to mean anything to anybody else. But
looks like something my 3-year-old drew.
that's my personal float you're talking about.
So I'm going to be the dumb guy again. When you were talking float, you weren't talking left to right. You were talking like creep type. I mean, you're talking tension.
No. I have a sensor that I can attach to my bow that shows me how much my bow moves at full draw. It shows me how it moves on a y-axis and an x-axis.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
But then it actually creates a graphic that. Go ahead, Aron.
Well, I just to break this down in even more layman terms, because I do it the same as Cody, but differently. I have a laser that I strap on my riser, and I put a target where that laser hits, and then I have the target where I'm aiming. We put a camera. We don't care about where I'm aiming. We put a camera on the target where the laser's hitting, and when you go from bow to bow to bow to bow, you take out all bro science and anybody paid to shoot or anything else, and you video them. You hand them 6 bows. One of those bows, that laser is going to move less than others. And it's very easy to document, and it's very easy to quantify. You just watch and track the laser, and it shows you how much it's moving in a dot, 20, 30, and 40 yards. And if your release is and your tune is good, that is your group, is how much that laser is moving if you're not screwing up your release hand. So a laser is kind of the same redneck way of what Cody's doing.
Yeah, fascinating. Sounds like something the Rad Lab's going to have to try.
Yeah, the Rad Lab. I like that. Speaking of the Rad Lab, here's your draw force curve, Rad Lab. It does take force to draw these sons of bitches. I thought that was funny. This is the change per inch, which is a version of the draw force. And I've overlaid the carbon change per inch and the black and white ebony. And I've already pointed out that they're slightly different weights, but it's not enough in my experience to kind of move around it to make a difference here of what we're looking at. And this isn't the traditional draw force. What you're looking at here is literally the change per inch. I like to show this instead of the traditional draw force because an archer can actually look at their draw length and they can see where there's a sudden change in the weight from these limbs. And what I'm sure everybody's different, but whenever I've studied people and I've asked them to tell me what stack is and isn't after I've run bows through this, typically a sudden shift in weight during the transfer portion of the shot or right before anchor is extremely sensitive. And that's how someone will say it stacks. So I look for that, the last 4 inches prior to the shot. I get a lot of questions on that. Does anybody else define stack in a different way?
No, that's pretty much goes along the lines of how I think about it.
And some people like stack and some people don't. But if you look at these, nevertheless, they're both braced up at 8 3/8. I had them braced to be optimal on carbon. It still makes for an even comparison here. I just wanted that wall. See that 2.6 jump right there? I like to adjust my brace so I'm moving. If I can find a little bump like that, I like to move it right behind my draw length, and that kind of helps me not overdraw. I can move right into it, and when I feel it resist me a little bit and get a little tight, I take advantage of it. And I adjust my brace for that as long as it doesn't make the bow loud, and then I just kind of tune around that. That's not what everybody does. Most people adjust their brace height to keep it from being loud, and then kind of leave it be. But when we look at these side by side, you can see that there's no advantage in terms of draw force to the carbon versus the glass. And I don't know if black and white ebony would make a difference versus like an Osage. Would you guys, Toby, does that make a difference? Do you see any draw force difference in veneers, or veneers so thin that they're insignificant?
Yeah, for the most part. You can't tell much difference in the veneers.
And I think there's some confusion because I've had people ask if they could put carbon on, then the veneer, and then the glass. Can you explain the layers to people why we're at this point in time?
Well, like I said, I've had some people call too, wanting to put veneers on top of it. I've been telling them no. Probably could, but I think it'd be defeating the purpose. You're just adding more weight and things like that. I think it'd be a negative. All it's going to do is, maybe improve the looks. If you don't like the looks of the black carbon, is it. So we've actually taken the center weft, the uniweft that we've put in from forever, right in the center of the limbs, which we use for stability. But now that this carbon is so stable, we've eliminated that piece. And so actually there's just 4 layers in a set of carbon limbs, Well, I take it back. There's 5 layers. You got 2 laminations and 2 layers of carbon and one layer of glass. So, it just right now it's just working out really good that way.
So in this comparison, sometimes I'll say wood, but really it's carbon and the veneer plus the glass. And we don't see a difference in the draw force curve here. The choppiness that you see is my measurement error. I have 2/10 of measurement error here, and I don't smooth it. If this were like for work or something like that, I would be happy to smooth it. But social media people tend to report like CNN does. So if I smoothed it, they would just say I was falsifying the data. So I just leave it completely raw. And so people know I'm not influencing it. So if you just squint your eyes and you look at the flow of this, you can see that they're almost dead on. They start to peak. The tapers are in the exact same spot. They start to rise at the same spot. I've just moved that little bump up on that set of limbs with the brace height. But what we have in front of us is a bow that doesn't stack. A person with 32 inches would still be pretty comfortable because it's a gradual climb out there. And I talked about inference space earlier. When Toby or Myles tasked me with this, I knew it was going to be my job to see if there was a difference between glass and carbon. So I intentionally went with the longest bow possible. If I would have been more intelligent, I would have picked the PL because I think I'll see a bigger difference in the PL. But I went with the PMA. So if you're one of those guys that is the KB the shortest? If you may not get the same experience as we talk about sound and speed if you're going with the shorter bows. It should be very similar, but it's not going to be exactly the same. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I'm shooting a 60-inch PSA, and I don't have another Widow to compare it to. But man, they seem really smooth to me. I don't know, Aron. What have you noticed
31,
anything
yeah.
in draw force on your 62-inch?
No, I mean, they feel pretty much the same I've probably had 10 Widows I've goofed around with over the last 4 or 5 years, and they all feel pretty much the same. I think what people need to really look at are what Cody's probably making a bigger deal of it than it is because it's Cody and you're very analytical. You could see a slight change in Cody's data on a 58-inch bow compared to a 64-inch bow. But if your draw length is commensurate to the bow length, I would bet it would be almost identical. But if you're drawing with a 58-inch bow at 29.5-inch draw length, it'll probably be different compared to a 62 or 64-inch bow. But if your draw length fits the length of the bow, from what I've seen, there's no difference from what Cody has on these charts.
Good point. Yeah. So there's no women and kids here. So I have a PMA. So it's hard for me to understand what you PSA shooters are experiencing.
I will wrap my G10 riser around your big ass head.
That went better than I thought, really. All right. Next one here that we're looking at is the chronograph. And this one always is the crowd favorite. And everybody that asks me about that wants to start testing bows, the first thing they ask about is the shooting machine. And I try to tell everyone the biggest waste of time testing bows is a shooting machine. As you heard me talk earlier about inference space or what you can infer from my study, none of us shoot like a shooting machine. The shooting machine tells us very little. It just helps me standardize bows when I'm doing direct comparisons. But when I'm doing a study for Blackwidow about their limb, the shooting machine doesn't tell them a whole lot. I need to do a lot of shooting off the fingers and control that as much as possible. But one interesting signal that I did find as I was shooting these off machine and off of fingers, carbon versus wood, the big signal that jumped out at me that again matches the practical use of the other folks talking is there's a bigger improvement. There's a tighter gap in variation that you see as I go from glass to the carbon fiber to glass. You get about 2 feet per second or up to 4. So 2 feet per second off of the machine, right? That's because the machine uses a release at the end and it holds the bow perfectly still. But I saw up to 4 feet per second gain off of my fingers. Now, I did play with shooting with really wonky releases. So my standard release, which was actually pretty clean whenever I did this because I just spent 2 months doing the walk back shoot. But I would actually torque the string and hook my wrist and I would break the shot. I actually set my shooting machine up offset so it would throw the string a little bit left and right, things of that nature, trying to see how it would handle it. And I taped the limbs with blue painter's tape, an old Rod Jenkins trick. And actually, here's the lipstick. And then I took lipstick and I put lipstick on my string. And as I was wrenching on the string and shooting, and I just knew this was going to create a really cool, I was expecting strings to hit at different angles on that blue tape. And the damn glass, they're all right down the center for both of them. So there was nothing to see there, and it's not in the slides. But where you can see it with greater precision is as if it's man on carbon and man on wood, you actually see less variation whenever I'm shooting on carbon than I am on wood. And that speaks to some of the stability that we have there. And obviously you see an even dispersion of when I come off the machine, I lose a little bit of speed, but I also measured across. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say to kind of, and tell me if I'm wrong. So looking at the graph here, it's 179 feet per second off the shooting machine with carbon. It's 173 per second off your fingers with the carbon. And then wood limbs off the machines, 177 and 169. So is it because the carbon is getting around your fingers faster or more efficiently? Is that why? Because with the shooting machine, just to break, the shooting machine is a perfect release every time. The string's not having to go around anything. When you're shooting fingers, the string has to go around your fingers. And is it because the carbon is getting around your fingers a little bit quicker and getting back to center a little bit quicker? Is that why you see that it's a little bit more efficient off fingers than the wood?
That was my assumption. But I tell everybody that I wasn't smart enough to score high in physics, so I learned stats. So I know what things do. I don't always know why they do. That was my theory, and you'll see that later in my testing as we move through this iterative learning.
If you watch it in the slow motion video, it's exactly that. So if you ever want to be freaked out, video a bow going off in slow motion, and you'll wonder how it stays together, just because that's all bows do that. When you have a bad release with wood, you're going to notice those limb tips pivot one way or another more than with a good release. What happens if you grab your bow? The easiest way to explain it: grab your riser with your left hand, grab your limb tip with your right hand, twist your limb tip. I'm not going to mention any bowyers, but you can twist a string right off the bow with most bowyers. If you grab a standard wood limb from Blackwidow and twist it, you're going to have torsional instability in comparison to a carbon limb, meaning you cannot hardly twist the carbon limb. Where you can twist, when it's strung up, you can twist a wood limb. It's the same basic principle. When it comes off your fingers, that limb is twisting, which is a decrease in performance, where with the carbon, even though it should be twisting in comparison to the same release with wood, your fingers, the carbon is not letting it twist like it would with a wood limb, which means there's no decrease in performance, which is why you're not getting variations in speed, because that limb is not even allowing it to twist in comparison to a wood limb. So out of the gate, it's not doing anything negative with a bad release in comparison to wood, because the carbon won't let it. Trying to explain that on a Facebook page is literally like Cody talking to me about quantum physics. Like, guys are like, what? It's like, look, dude, it straightens out quicker, or it doesn't even get crooked. It's the best way I can explain it is it doesn't even start off negatively because that carbon doesn't allow the limb to twist. Cody, did I do a very good job explaining that?
No, I think you did. It's I should have done that, because that would have been a really good graphical expression. Yeah, it's another discussion, but have you done that with a quiver on the bow?
Yeah, I did it with and without quiver, and I did it with multiple quivers. And I don't want to get into the whole quiver, thing. There's goods and bads. There's pros and cons to having a quiver on your bow. And I didn't notice really any difference in when I say that with slow motion video and photography. That is something I did not notice as far as the limb tips. What you do notice with a bow quiver on is tuning is much, much different. But I don't want to get into that because we'll be here all night.
No, I mean, I didn't know if there'd be an interaction there or not. The only other thing
I didn't see it on that.
Okay. The only other thing that I'd point out is that supports what we're saying here, as you go with heavier and heavier and heavier arrows, it's very, very common to get less and less and less variation on your shots off the fingers through chronographs. The theory there being, the arrow, the mass of the arrow itself kind of stabilizes the difference in tillers between the two limbs, because the limbs have to pull a little bit harder into that. So as I go ahead, this is especially true when you get into like ASLs and some of the old fashioned longbows. You can get a lot of variation. And then as you go up in arrow weight, you can see that variation start to come out. And that's one of the tests I test when I say a bow has good tiller. If it shoots a light arrow with less variation, that's why. And that's something that was very present here.
Well, I guess the simplest way to look at this, well, in my brain anyways, is off the machine, there's a 2 feet per second difference in carbon versus wood limbs. Off of fingers, there's a 4 feet per second difference. So
That's
that
exactly
should
right.
tell you that, that should tell you pretty much everything you need to know right there. Is it's just more efficient getting around your fingers, and that's where your extra speed is coming from, I would imagine. So
I think, Cody, that was the only thing you and I probably talked about with these limbs. I'm going off of memory here. I think I mentioned to you at one point, as an ancillary benefit, I gained 3 to 4 feet per second from the wood limbs. Am I misremembering that, or did we talk about that?
I saw it on a post. I don't think you and
that might have been it.
I think I saw it on a post because I saw Myles release it. It was before I'd run my studies. I'm like, oh, Jesus, please don't let these come back negative now that they've posted that. But they didn't.
Well, I
know.
think the only reason I bring up. No, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, the only reason I bring up speed and me bringing it up to you is because Cody and I don't talk a whole lot. Is the first thing anybody. Speed seems to be like, even though speed doesn't kill anything, it helps a little, but everybody thought the carbon limb was for speed. I read some of the posts on the Facebook page, and it's like the last thing in my mind I was worried about was speed, because it's just a faster miss if the performance or shootability didn't increase. And so speed was the last thing on my mind with these limbs. That was just an added, benefit. And it's pretty easy to stand in front of a chronograph, wing some arrows through it. I have both bows, same weight and wood. The 3 to 4 feet is just an added bonus. It's not something. Carbon doesn't just magically throw black powder in the ass into your arrow. It helps a little, but it's not. It's a limb profile that's going to gain speed more than the carbon.
That's exactly right. I agree. And because I had heard somewhere else also that there was a massive difference in tune. I could see a difference in tune. Now, when I do testing like this, I use aluminum arrows because they have a broader window of tune. But at 40 yards with XX75s, I could see the carbon shooting a little bit weaker, but it was just a tad. So it wasn't a massive difference, but it was there.
I would imagine that a lot of people aren't going to be able to tell that difference anyway, for the most part. No, I've said it before. Speed is very secondary to me. My speed's going to be what my speed's going to be. I'm used to a certain speed. So if even if these were 10 feet per second faster, I would probably just end up bumping my arrow weight up to keep my trajectory pretty close to the same as it has been. So to me, the forgiveness aspect of it and sound is a much bigger benefit to me.
I'm in the other line. I want them to put a little bit more curve in these, and let's see what we can do now that we got the stability. To hell with all that. I want to see what Widow can do. You guys can let them take it soft on them if you want. I get to say what I want. I want to make good use of this stability. I want to keep pushing them.
I think that that the changing the limb profile, it would be intriguing to see now that the car adding foam, a foam core, and changing the limb profile. Obviously, you guys are probably listening to this thinking, and you're going to have to delete this, but shut up, Aaron. But I would like to see foam in a different limb profile as well. The thing is when you get a bow, and as anybody watches Cody and I think I've tested, 8 bows in the last 3 months. When you get a when I have killed and had as much good luck as I've had with a widow, and then they go to carbon. Now, when, I crap my pants and an animal's coming in, there's an increase in chance of me hitting the animal when I'm pooping my pants. And it's vast or very significant from everything I saw. One of the first things that someone like Cody or myself are going to be thinking is, with this kind of improvement, how much better could it be if? Meaning, if you went to foam core when I'm hunting in negative or 15-degree weather, negative whatever, will it increase improvement with a foam core? Will a different limb profile give me the same stability with an increase in 15 per second or 9 feet per second, which I can still keep my point on the same by adding an increase in mass weight of my arrow, which means the lethality if I accidentally hit it in the front shoulder or pick a body part, and still have the same accuracy? Yeah, it makes somebody wonder, like, hey, is it worth giving it a whirl? As I say that, no one called Toby and Myles and asked for that shit, because then they're going to be mad at me. So nobody asked them for that, but it did cross my mind.
You can email them or text. That's still on the table. So everyone can buy them.
You guys
Cody.
never satisfied.
It's continuous improvement. It's not interval improvement. All right.
I'm 45. I'm still learning how to spell. Continuous improvement.
There you go. This is one that I put together because you don't know how different limbs are going to respond at different weights, right? And at different draw lengths. And as I told you before, the study was about trying to gain as much inference from it as possible. So here, this would allow somebody with a 26-inch draw like Rob to look at this and know exactly where he's at in terms of performance, and using different weighted arrows as well. And one thing that jumped out at me, because we hear it quite a bit, is that, and I asked Toby this when we were there, you hear people say a lot that the limbs, you're not in the sweet spot with the limbs, or the limbs aren't opening up a lot. But I was surprised to see that it's very linear. Like, whether I'm drawing at 26, 27, 28, 29, 30 across 10 grains per pound all the way to 13, you see roughly 7.5 to 7.75 feet per second gain. So these widows from 26 to 30, you would expect, based on the average internet archer's opinion, that somewhere around the middle you would see like a 10 foot per second gain, because you always hear people say, the limbs aren't opening up. But what we're actually seeing in both the wood and the glass, I should say, and the carbon, is that it's a very linear gain in performance of 7.75 feet per second or 7.5 feet per second, whenever I kind of average that out from a 10 grain per pound arrow all the way to the 13. Does that kind of
that's
make
fascinating?
sense to you, Toby?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I guess
your draw length as a grown man is 26 inches or the 7 inches.
I was going to say, I think Rob missed the fact that you were taking shots at it in the
I had to
middle.
bring it back. To him.
I just let it go. But man, and it took me a bit to digest this. That's fascinating.
And
So adding to that, the bro science of the internet, which is why I shoot a PSA, is I went to order a PMA originally, which is what Randy Cooling told me to do, and a little bit shorter limbs. And I had multiple people say, no, get the PSA. The limbs will open up more and you'll get more speed. I was relative newcomer at the time, and I'm like, sounds good to me. I want them limbs open, damn it. Well, I've shot multiple other, it was bro science. Now I'm stuck now because I'm so comfortable with a 17-inch riser. In fact, Cody was making fun of me the other day about that, in longer limbs. That's what I'm comfortable with, and I'm too chicken to change. But shooting a longer riser with a shorter limb, I did not notice, meaning my release or bad release, it breaks up any change of the 1 or 2 foot per second difference that might be there with a longer riser and a shorter limb compared to a shorter riser and a longer limb opening up more. I only saw 1 to 2 foot per second difference, and that could have been my release. And that truly, when I started, was bro science of people telling me what I should be doing, and I just didn't know any better. Now I'm comfortable with it, and I just don't want to change. But Cody, is that what you're seeing, Cody? Maybe a second at most, too.
Yeah.
From a short riser.
It's a small amount in speed, and It's more in, the vibration, not even sound, but in the vibration.
Touch on that, because there is a significant difference that I've seen videoing a 17-inch riser with longer limbs and let's say a 21-inch riser with shorter limbs. The amount of the amount of time it takes for a longer limb to recover is significant compared to a shorter limb.
Right. I mean, if you think about our bows, the greatest source of variation outside of the human is the limbs. The riser doesn't, it does twist a little bit, but nothing like the limbs, right? And limb stability is very, very important. And that doesn't mean for everyone to go out and buy short limbs, because, they'll stack like mad. To your comment earlier, Aaron, about matching to your draw length. But you want to pick your width, your limb length based on how you hunt. If you hunt out of a tree stand and you can clear out limbs, shoot as long a bow as you can comfortably shoot, because this shows you're not losing a lot of speed at different draw lengths, and you're gaining, to your point, 1 to 2 feet per second. But that string angle forgives you a lot more when you get a little bit longer. And the longer the limb, the more vibration you're going to have. If you're shooting aggressive hooks, like I'm testing some really aggressive hooks right now, that becomes much, much more significant. Shorter limbs are much better whenever you have those big hooks shaking out on the ends. These traditional shaped limbs, it's, to your point, it's 1 to 2 feet per second. Best case scenario.
See, Cody, you're a horrible, horrible salesman. You should be saying, everybody, if you have a 60-inch Widow, you definitely need a 64, because that increases orders. You totally missed that. You blew that out of the water.
Sorry. I try not to be a salesman. But that was an interesting finding. It was kind of an accidental finding, but for me, I just don't know. I don't know where that theory came from. I asked Toby, "What do you think?" I mean, you probably get
you asked me that when we were down there, why we'd ever recommend, a shorter limb to anyone. And it was more than anything, just mobility, and stuff. I don't know. I mean, more people are going. There's no doubt, seeing the glue list and stuff, more people are going to longer limbs now.
Sorry.
Than before. Yeah. And because we used to see a lot of short limbs, especially when blind hunting, the double bull blinds and stuff came out, and it seemed like everybody wanted a short bow. But man, we're building very, like in the SA, the PSA, we've built that in a 56-inch. I could probably count on one hand the number of 56-inch we build in a year, and not very many 58-inch. I mean, it's mainly 60 and 62.
Yeah, I see points dropping when I studied length. When you get below 60, I start dropping points, and I'm a 28-inch draw. I'm a good benchmark there, and that's practical shooting. That's something I feel like most people would, feel. That's not 40 yards stuff, but just gets more critical.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, I wouldn't recommend anybody picking limbs based on a magical portion where the limbs open up and start, where you gain a little bit of efficiency, because we certainly don't see that with the old material or the new material here. And I thought that was pretty cool to see that linear. That also means you get a linear power stroke. If you think about it, you're not getting this really hard spike up front and really soft in the back. You're getting a really linear power stroke into the arrow. All right.
I feel like I'm in math class.
This one I should have, I left a picture. I need to put a picture in here for people, and I will. So it'll be easier to visualize what I did here. But this is the torsional stability, and this is a really popular subject for some reason. A lot of people talk about torsional stability, and you can have too much torsional stability depending on your own personal ability of shooting. If I buy $800 ILF limbs that are really, really stiff, I'll actually lose points. So I think some people put too much emphasis on this, but I wanted to point it out because there's also people that torque the hell out of the string. And if you can't get good arrow flight without a little bit of a raised rest, this is really an important upgrade for you. We're going to talk about torsional stability and draw length. I told Roger this when I presented to Widow. You longer draw guys, this is going to be a good step function improvement for you as well. One mistake I see people making when they're doing reviews and they're talking about torsional stability is they measure it at brace at the end of the limb, which is the section I have in the top left. Well, when our bows, regardless of the damn bow, when it's at brace, it's its most stable point in time. So to measure the limb tip moving as you put weight on it or something like that, you're really not inferring much to the archer. Again, I got to create a study we can learn from. Like I don't want to shoot a bunch of dead animals, then go teach people how to shoot live animals. We've got to kind of study a bow as it's being shot and how is it's sitting at brace. So what I did, I took some push force instruments that I use to push broadheads through and measure resistance in foot pounds. Or in pounds, in this case, I can move it to foot pounds or pounds. And this first measurement is me at the end of the limb at 28 inches, and I'm pushing down on it. So I've got it in the tiller board, I've got it drawn to 28, and I'm pushing down on it to a fixed point. And I'll take a picture of this so people can see what I'm doing. But I'm literally pushing on the end of the limb, and I have a self-leveling laser there so I can see it breaking the plane of the laser, and I measure the force required to do that. And you can see here the top on glass is 3.4 pounds. The bottom is 4 pounds of force to move it, to break the plane of the laser. The carbon is 11.2 pounds top and 9.4 pounds. That's a significant. So what the guys were saying much earlier around, they felt like they were getting cleaner releases. I can actually quantify that here in their experience with the instruments. And it's extremely significant. And then because I wasn't sure even then, because we don't pull on the ends of our limbs, right? We pull. The biggest mistake I see people make whenever they call me and they say they can't get a good tune, it's people that torque the string and they put a lot of pressure on their ring finger, and they bend that string, and when they let go of that string, the string pops and it throws that shaft down into the shelf, and they can't figure out why they have wild knock highs. And when you're torquing the string like that, even if it's not that much, you are changing your tiller every time. And I genuinely believe this is what, for decent shooters, we're not talking about brand new shooters here, decent shooters that can't figure out why they have some wonky groups or inconsistencies. I think it's because they change tiller every bloody time. And my theory really is derived by the grip clicker. When I first saw the grip clicker, I thought, man, that's genius, right? And then when I heard how many people couldn't click it repeatedly, I thought, well, it's still genius, but it's a different tool now because we put so much different pressure on our hands and into our bow. And if you're putting different pressure at your grip, it may be coming from your grip, but more than likely it's coming from you doing this at different pressures on your string, and you're tilting that back and forth. And this clearly shows glass at 13.2 pounds and carbon at 20.4 pounds. That's me pushing with a digital push force gauge and breaking the plane of the laser at the string at full draw where our ring fingers are. That's 7 more pounds of force, 7.2 pounds of force more to get it to move out of plane. I set up the level laser. I broke it even where the guys carved in the string groove, so I could see when we were moving it out the string width of the string groove.
Cody, I'm going to add to this because I didn't know you and I are doing the same thing. But I don't talk about this because I worry about people derailing the bow at full draw. What I have is basically a Hilti laser level that shoots beams all over the place. I put the bow in my Hooter shooter. I draw it back. I shoot the beam just like Cody, straight up and down the limb. I have a tool that it's actually we use for checking the back pressure of a door. I actually clamp on the limb a flat piece of wood that sticks out 2 inches past on either side, just so I can get a little leverage. It's not exactly the same thing Cody's doing, but that allows me to put my gauge at full draw straight onto that, push against it until that laser breaks that center plane of that limb, which sounds like, Cody, you're doing the same thing. The thing that's crazy about, and I agree with Cody, doing it just sitting there like I told you to do earlier, it shows you how much stiffer the limb is, but it's not the same as, at full draw. The thing that is alarming is you can derail a bow at full draw or unstring it at full draw. And I've seen people do it at the range that really torque their string, meaning usually their ring finger is twisting away from their face. And if you shoot a laser level with the guy, if you could do it with the guy shooting it, you will see generally that bottom limb is twisting a significant amount more, which is crazy, than the top limb, but you can have the string come off of the limb tips if it's bad enough. What's insane is when you start to really, I don't know if you've done this, but I've blown up several bows. If you test that pressure enough, you can push on that enough to twist the string off. For some bows, it is, especially compared to a carbon limb like on this Widow, it literally is like 60% more pressure on the carbon limb at full draw than some of the other wooden limbs to derail the bow or unstring the bow completely. I don't know if you've done that, but I had a couple guys on hunts, different, not a Widow, different bow. And if you can imagine this, left leg's up, right leg's down, you're really torquing the hell out of your bow trying to get this shot, and had the string come off of the bow because they were torquing it so much. So it's probably a lot more important than people may realize in a hunting situation, because even if it doesn't unstring, your arrow flight is going to be horrible. And again, I'm agreeing with Cody on the group thing, because a lot of guys, if you watch them shoot, they're putting horrible downward pressure or outward or both, and it really affects a limb that's flimsy, basically.
Well, I'm going to add to this because I think it applies to me. I torque the string some. I've tried to not, but just because of lack of flexibility in my upper body, it's hard for me to get my arm rolled over. So I do torque the string a little bit, and that's why I ended up having to go to a raised rest, and it kind of alleviated the problem. I do it very consistently, but it's still not a good thing. And so
you said doo-doo.
Yeah, doo-doo. Where was I going with that? Cody, you said that like torquing the string, like the variance in torquing the string is not going to change tiller as much on the carbon versus wood. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, I'm not good at mental math, but it's 20.4 versus 13.2. He's good at mental math, so he can convert it to a percentage, but that's the difference on that third under ring finger position. And like I told Roger when I was there, and the guys listening now, at 30 inches, that 20.4 pounds goes all the way down to 13. So the guys that have the longer draws it may be definitely worth the upgrade to go to this limb, because they clearly become, any bow becomes more finicky the farther back we go. What do we do?
Did we lose everybody, or are they trying to read Cody's graph?
No,
we're all here. I really wished I had went on YouTube with this, because it is helpful to you're really going to want to have these slides up when you're listening. I couldn't follow along. I have to be walked through it.
I'm going to try to post them up when this releases.
Okay, cool. Over on the Blackwidow site.
Yeah, these belong to Widow, basically. I mean, it's their analysis. They can move them wherever they like.
Cody, the one thing I would like to bring up, because I definitely approach a lot of this more of a redneck testing, and you're a lot more, I don't know what, you're very, more of a lab testing, obviously Tradlab. I would say everything that you and I almost have talked about over the last few years pretty much parallel or coincide with each other on testing. Would you agree with that, within reason?
Yeah,
yes?
Our parallel paths are usually really close. Yeah.
And I can understand most of things Cody says. Occasionally he'll send a text and I'm like, I don't want to seem like I'm that dumb, but I'm going to have him break that down, because I'm not sure what the hell he's saying. But if you get that aside, what it basically boils down to, when people are when you're shitting your pants and you have a 190-inch deer come in, you're torquing the string and, lists all the things you do wrong. The carbon limb is better, not speed, but it's going to recover faster. You're going to have a less of a decrease or increase in speed from human error, when you have a pressure situation, whether it be a tournament or an animal. And when I get guys, sometimes trying to have me explain to them what Cody is saying is, you have a better chance of hitting the animal. Forget about everything else because you're going to get a migraine because the carbon is that much more efficient in all of the downsides of a human shot. I mean, if you take anything away from that, I would say take that away. You just have a better chance of hitting the target when the human screws up. And again, I'm sure, Cody, sometimes you confuse the hell out of people with what you say, but would you agree that's probably one of the easiest ways to explain it when you're talking about these limbs?
Yeah. Yeah, but it's hard to get paid to make it that simple. I try to doll it up. You got to dazzle them with bullshit if you're trying to get paid, Aaron.
Yeah, on my end, I'm just trying to get them out of my inbox because there's too many messages. I'm like, it's better, buy it, leave me alone.
They're gooder, yeah. Thanks for hiring me, Myles. They're gooder. Yeah.
They're the goodest limb of widows made.
Gooder.
What did I miss? I had to take a work call. I don't know. I didn't know.
Aaron made me sound like a dickhead.
No, I was just trying to simplify it because I don't have time to break all that down when people ask. I'm like, look, you got a lot better chance of hitting the animal when you screw up. And really, I mean, the info you give out is amazing. I'm definitely not downplaying that at all because obviously I wouldn't ask you questions when I have things that I'm curious about. But truly, the big thing for people to think about if they're looking at upgrading the limb is when human error comes into play, the carbon limb is better. And that's the best way to look at it. When you pluck the string, it recovers faster. You have way less variances in your speed. I mean, all of those things come into play. That's a big deal.
Yeah, I completely agree. So yeah, like Aaron simplified the stability piece, and then, you know, in summary, the step function improvement that everybody will be able to hear, because I'll add the slide here. There were a lot of tests I ran that aren't on here, like throwing them outside during the freezing weather and checking variances as temperature, and they match the wood until they change their core. It's going to do that. But one other thing I did was the blind study in terms of sound. And my wife is actually tone deaf. My wife can't tell the difference between a major and a minor chord, like on the guitar. So she's great to test sound on because frequency doesn't bother her. But she's 5 for 5. She can pick the carbons as the quietest. So any archer that picks these up or listens to them is gonna notice that step function improvement in sound. And then any archer that's shooting it is going to notice the vibration. The other improvements that Aaron's speaking to, I believe, would be considered incremental. And they are incremental improvements in speed, but there is a step function improvement in stability. But
Cody, it's amazing because my wife has made me tone deaf, and it's almost the same thing as your wife being tone deaf. It's in reverse, though. Mine has actually made me tone deaf from yelling at me. That's almost identical.
You better hope she doesn't listen to this. All right,
she won't.
This graph will probably delete because it's confusing, and there's some really cool stuff here.
More confusing?
Yeah, but it's some really cool signals here, but it's confusing to look at, and it actually leads to more questions. Like any investigation, they call it a thought map because you're continuously validating and invalidating theories, and along the way you pick up new theories. So if you just left this out here, people would draw their own conclusions. It's human nature. But what we have here, Aaron, since you can't see it, is I took the radar chronograph and I shot this out to 40 yards. And I shot carbon versus wood, right? And I color coded each one. So the blue dots are the carbon, the red dots are the wood at zero vector all the way to 40. And 0 to 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 5-yard increments. And I kind of show the velocity decay. How much they slow down over each distance. And as I'm looking at that, you see, and remember, I shot these with the exact same XX75 aluminum arrow. And remember me telling you that the arrow was a little weak for the carbon. So I believe that's why we're seeing a little bit of variance. But 0 to 25, you clearly see the carbon limbs outperforming the wood limbs. After 25 yards, it reverses completely, and the wood limbs are outperforming the carbon limbs. Now, if I had more time, I would have dove into this and I would have tuned each arrow to these. But there's really nowhere to stop if you don't just stop. But what you're seeing here is you're seeing that velocity decay. I believe the arrow is coming out cleaner, and that's why you're getting the better speed, 0 to 25. And anyone that's shot any type of 3D, we all know there's this magical graveyard around 23 yards where your trajectory changes completely. Do you know what I mean? And you're no longer shooting on the flat. I think that when that trajectory falls off, the tune of the arrow took over, and that's why you see it improve in speed. Then there's always a but when you don't know what you're talking about. And I can't account for all the variation here, so I clearly don't know what I'm talking about. But, and I'm hoping maybe Aron or Blake can jump in here with practical experience. There was a 4-inch trajectory delta. Regardless of 30 to 40 yards, the wood being a little bit faster, arrows shot out of the carbon limbs had a 4-inch improvement in trajectory. And I was shooting this off my fingers, and normally I would be able to tell you that I don't shoot enough precision to do this, but I kid you not, the best groups of my life are shot when I don't care where I hit, but I care about not messing up the chronograph. So I'm literally not focusing on aiming at all. I'm focusing on breaking a perfect shot. So I can shoot, no one will believe me, but I can shoot 3-inch groups at 40 yards when I don't care about hitting what I'm aiming at. I had the best groups of my life in this exact portion of the study. I walk, and all you're doing is worrying about getting perfect shots and form. But the 4-inch trajectory delta blew me away, especially whenever I looked at this. So the theory used to be it takes mass to throw mass. So that's what the old longbow guys say, right? The heavier longbow limbs throw a heavy arrow better, but this isn't showing that to be the case. Out of 11 GPP for 11.04 versus 11.41. Does any of that make any sense?
Nope.
Man, I it made sense to me, but I speak Cody. You may want to break that shit down one more time, because I'm sure people are going to listen to that and be like, what the hell?
I don't know how to do it. Can you, so basically 0 to 25 yards, the carbon performed better, but with the exact same arrow, 30 to 40 yards, the wood showed up. The arrow was tuned to the wood. So I'm saying that's probably due to the tune of the arrow kind of taking over where your trajectory kind of falls out. I have no explanation for the 4-inch trajectory difference being the carbon hit 4 inches higher than the wood or the glass. But that's
I'm not
that's
sure. Go ahead, Aron. You probably followed that a little better than I did.
As I understand it, man, I would have to chalk it up to the tune. Now, keep in mind, Cody, when I did this test, I can't really parallel what you did, because I had 2 completely separate bows that I had tuned 2 completely different arrows. So it was very easy for me to say, okay, the 4-inch difference, let's say, from the carbon, which mine was about the same at 40 yards.
okay.
That I hit a little bit higher. Well, so believe me, it baffled me, because speed is speed. And once it's out of the bow, the only thing that can change that is the tune or the flight. So for me, I literally just chalked it up. That 4-inch difference was just the tune when I tuned one to the next. I think if everything being equal, I don't think there would be a difference. But I tuned separate arrows. When I say tune separate arrows, I had to change a little bit different. So I couldn't make it exactly the same. I don't think there would be any difference, and probably you should throw that out, because you're going to confuse the hell out of people, because it's not like the wood limbs throw a little, mouse in the ass end of your little wheel of an arrow and make it climb less or more. It's got to be just the tune.
Right.
Well, that's kind of what I was gonna. I mean, it makes sense to me if the arrow's paradoxing less out of one tune versus another, maybe that's going to.
Yep.
That's going to carry, or more energy is going to be into, or it's going to maintain its energy better, I guess is.
But what's confusing about what happened here, to your point, Blake, the carbon was moving faster, 0 to 25 yards. And then.
No, but that still makes sense, because even if the carbon was moving faster, the parachute of a bad flying arrow is going to catch up eventually, even though out of the bow.
Yeah, that I agree with completely.
As the velocity slows down, that's going to make more of a difference too, I would think.
That's what we're seeing. I think that after that 23-yard graveyard that we all know about, it slows down. Yeah.
I'm not. I don't know. I'm not sure that. I'm not sure people are going to totally follow that, but
no, I'll ditch this one. I knew that going out that when we went public with this may confuse. And even for me as an investigator, there's a series of tests. But you have to stop somewhere. But there's questions that come from this. You're like, all right, I'm going to levelize my arrow. I'm going to make sure I match it exact in tune, and I'm going to go check this out. And I will do more studies on massive limb versus massive arrow and dive into that a little bit more. But that's where we're at.
One thing I think that should be touched on as far as the tune, the carbon limb, for lack of a better explanation, fires harder. You will need a slightly stiffer arrow. You can't, and believe me, I got a pile of widows. You're not going to take an arrow. You know, the riser in my case is part of it too. The G10 riser is going to tune different, but matching up apples to apples, side by side, the carbon limb is going to need a little bit stiffer arrow or a little bit shorter arrow, however you want to look at it. You're not going to be able to just take one and go to the other and think it's going to fly perfect. That carbon limb does hit a bit harder or tune a little harder, so it's going to take a little bit stiffer arrow.
Did you, and I know this is going to be advanced, I always talk about the window of tune, because tune isn't binary. You're not in tune or out of tune. People that call me with tuning questions are usually on the edge of their tune. I get a broad, and I use aluminum arrows when I'm trying to determine this. I got a clear, broader window of tune with the carbon versus the glass. I don't bring that up because the average person knows what I'm talking about, but that's a big deal to a lot of people.
That 100%. And when you say broader tune, meaning when you say there's a larger umbrella of what you can get away with a carbon limb. The one thing I noticed too is the brace height is much easier to change in tune, and don't ask me why. I can tune easier a carbon limb by changing the brace height than I can a wood limb. I have no idea why. It's the one set of limbs I have that I've tested a lot. A 1/4 to 3 inch change in the brace height was more significant with the carbon than it was with the wood, and I don't know why.
I've actually
two slides. You look back 2 slides. It's more tension to do that. So as you're adding that brace, this shows it takes more tension from the carbon to move that. It's no different than tension on your ring finger. The same physics apply, right, Aaron? As you raise your brace height, you're pulling down a little bit more tension on those carbon limbs. So it's adding in.
Well, as you say that, it seemed like whenever I put 5 or 6 twists in my string, it wasn't making as big of a change as what it would on. Is that what you're getting at there? It didn't seem like it was making as big a change on brace height as if you put 5 or 6 twists in a string on. What are you saying?
With the carbon, yeah.
Is that what you were saying, Aaron?
Go ahead, Cody. You're going to explain it better than me, but yeah.
If you're in the middle of your tune, so if there's a window of tune, I try to do this test right in the middle of the tune. I can see that as I change brace height, I see a broader swing within that window of tune with the carbon than I do the glass. I attributed that to there's more string tension. And whenever I change that, it's making a bigger change.
Okay.
You could have seen that because you're on the edge of your tune, and any slight, it may take a big difference as you lower your brace height to see it shift. But if you put yourself right in the middle, you'll see some big jumps. And this probably isn't going to, Rob, and I don't, because you can always take down the rabbit hole. When we start talking about windows of tune, Roger's going to punch me right in the mouth the next time he meets me. People be calling him up and talking about windows of tune.
What I was saying is I could get more of a tear out of my bow just by adjusting the brace height, it seemed like. Is that not in line with what you're saying? Like if I was getting a 1 inch stiff tear, I could adjust that with brace height more with the carbon versus other limbs. Okay.
That's what I'm saying, yes.
I'm following you now. Okay.
Well, this, you may want to, you don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole or make this confusing as hell.
Yeah, actually, Cody, let's talk about that a little bit. if you can't hit a stop sign at 20 yards, a lot of this shit we're talking about is out the window. And when I say that, I don't have a perfect release, or I'm not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. But when you start to micro tune, but your group's the size of a stop sign at 20 yards, I wouldn't try to micro tune, because you're going to drive yourself crazy. If your release is that inconsistent, micro tuning is impossible. When I say micro tuning, talking about bumping the rest in and out, changing the tiller or changing the brace height, you're going to drive yourself crazy because you don't have a consistent enough starting point to even start a micro tune.
Right. It's just like a compounder chasing the pins, right?
Yep.
It's the exact same thing. And I tell people, because I think people quit our sport because they get frustrated trying to tune too much. Tune to your ability, and as your ability improves, you can tune a little bit more. But people get really frustrated with tune. But yeah, that's a good point. And in the same breath, and I told this to Toby and the guys, the last thing I want to do is Tradlab is try to upsell people. You know, if you're like me, and the first custom bow I built, I packed my lunch for a year, and the money I saved went into a can every week. And at the end of the year, I had enough money to buy a custom bow. If you're saving up money to buy a Widow, what is this? Is this $100 or $200 upgrade?
Limbs for the carbon are 100 over the exotic price.
Right. So I guess to Aaron, to Aronize this, you can kill shit with a standard gray bark Blackwidow. You know, this isn't going to make you kill more. Don't if you don't have disposable income, there's nothing wrong with a standard bow. If you're not shooting super tight groups and you know your standard draw length, I don't want to make someone think they have lesser equipment and they can't get it done with a regular gray bark or green leaf.
Yeah, in the same hand, I mean, it's no different than camo clothing or anything else. The camo clothing doesn't help you kill anything, or our high performance clothing. It just makes you more comfortable doing it. If you're one of those guys, you know, Cody speaking is in general, if you're one of those alpha male type dudes, and you have to have the best for your own mental stability, you're going to want to get a carbon limb, or it's going to be in the back of your mind that you don't have the highest performing limb or whatever that's possible when you head into the woods. Having said that, I mean, obviously I had amazing luck with a standard Widow, and I would have no issue shooting, you know, the standard limbs that you guys have offered forever. They're amazing limbs. There is a difference in the carbon, and for me, it's very important, and I'm, you know, super happy with that. But if you're the guy asking to put wood veneers on top of the carbon, you really might want to take a step back and think about what you're asking, because you're taking some of the goodness of the carbon limb and covering it with wood for the greater good of looks. But it's taking away what the carbon's giving you. You know, the spray paint it if you have to, like just spray paint it wood grain. I don't know what to tell you, but if you're asking that, it truly is taking away from what that carbon limb is giving you by adding a wood veneer to the top of it.
That's it. So that's the end of my analysis for them. At the end of the analysis, I asked them about PLs, because it's the ratio of veneer and glass to core that would be interesting, because the PL has more glass and veneer in it to the rest of the limb. And you may, all the benefits we're seeing here, you may see bigger benefits in terms of sound and vibration in the PL. So I saw someone on Facebook, I think on the Widow page, say that the PL wouldn't gain benefit from this. I haven't got to test it, but I would theorize based on what we do know and the variation we can account for in sound, that I think the PL may even be a better candidate for this, for you longbow shooters.
I would agree with you 100%. I don't know how it couldn't.
Right.
And we're in the process of that right now. I'm going to build some PLs. Also, we haven't built one yet with the car. I mean, we've got a strip of carbon in our longbow and have for years, but not like this cross woven on the front and back. We haven't done it yet, but we're fixing to.
So it's more better in conclusion.
Yeah, it's more better. It's gooder, is what he said. That's what the man said.
Let me ask you this: what What, if any, are the downsides?
Aesthetics.
It doesn't look like wood.
No. Okay.
Doesn't have a
Oh,
soul. If that doesn't bother you,
you were-
Rob, I don't know what does.
If I could say you're stuttering on that, do you know how many people sent me hate mail saying that I was not that many, but enough that I can't believe that you were part of talking Widow into making a carbon limb when their limbs are fine. And I'm like, should we burn books too? I mean, throw computers away? Like, Jesus, guys, you still can buy a wood limb. That's all right. Yeah, guys, just out of curiosity, how has, as I'm saying that, because, you know, you can imagine that's a pretty hard lining, fedora wearing flannel shirt type of guy that's sending me that message. How has the overall, you know, what's been kind of the, has the carbon limb been a huge success? I mean, has it been welcomed very well?
I'd say it has been.
Yeah, as a whole, very welcome. And we're just now getting them out there. In fact, we start, we just started offering them the first of the year. That's how far behind we are. We will start next week. Will be the last set of 2020 bows. So the week after next, we'll be building a bunch of carbon limbs because we've just built, one here, one there, guys. When we introduced them, some guys already had their bows ordered, called, and changed. And so there's not, what have we built? 20, maybe 15 or 20 sets, but they're really fixing to come out here in the next 30 days. There'll be a lot of guys getting them. So we ought to hear a lot of feedback, after that.
Does that mean the text I just sent you about building my backup limbs, I'll see them in 2022?
If you're lucky.
About elk season.
Perfect. Well, what would you say as far, on not total numbers, what would you say for the last month that's been carbon to wood on a ratio?
Right now, we're still selling more wood than carbon. Right when we first brought them out, and we didn't even send out a catalog this year, so everything we've put out has just been social media and you guys talking and stuff. It was half and half probably. So I think if we had a catalog out and stuff, it would be even more, but I don't know percentage wise, but we're selling a good number of them.
I bet that changes after this podcast.
Yeah.
Well, we just got a new latch in, so we're ready. We got a new, finally got more G10 in, and we haven't even advertised that or anything to speak of. I've told a few guys, but we've got the green, like in, Blake and Aaron's is both the green G10, and we've also got it in black, which I think will look really cool too. So I'll try to get some of them built and get some pictures of those out and see how those go.
Just because I've had sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, just a couple questions on the G10 because it's going to get asked. What's the upcharge for the G10 riser and compared to, like the standard riser?
It's $100 upcharge. So right now, what we're looking at, if a person orders a carbon limb and a G10 riser, it'd be $200 over exotic price. You'd be looking at $1,500. And so if you just want the handle or just the limbs, it's $100 each over exotic price, which I don't have a catalog in front of me, so I can't tell you exactly what that is, but 60% of $1,500 would be the limbs and 40% would be the handle.
Hey, Aaron,
Go ahead.
Just real quick, because I've been asked and I can't find my scale. Have you weighed the wood risers versus the G10 to see what the weight difference is in your PSA?
The G10 on my PSA is 3 pounds 6 ounces. I can't remember what the wood is. So again, and Cody, you can touch on this. I know a lot of people like a lighter bow. I've heard people, mention I don't want the heavier bow. Strap a laser on your riser and aim with a heavier bow compared to a lighter one, and it will enlighten you on why a little bit heavier bow is potentially worthwhile to look at. You will definitely hold significantly better. There's not, within reason, a time I've ever tested this where the heavier bow doesn't win when you talk about float.
Tight rope walkers don't use light poles that are straight. They use poles that are heavy and they bend, and it gives you some.
You're talking a lot about poles. Cody, you normally laugh at that. Are you tired?
I wasn't ready for a dick joke right in the middle of the widow analysis. But
I just brought it to everybody's attention. I didn't make the joke. You were the one talking about it. Hey, if people spray paint the carbon limbs, is that going to void the warranty? That is a question I did get.
Spray paint? I don't care. They're yours. Do what you want with them.
No, the G10 is awesome for me. You could use it as a defense weapon, and it's just that heavier mass weight. You're getting probably the weight of a PMA wood riser in a shorter, more compact PSA riser. So I guess that's, it's the reason why I don't shoot a longbow is because a recurve generally is got a heavier mass weight riser and just holds a lot steadier. So.
Yeah, I measured one or weighed one. Where I think it's just under a half a pound more.
The G10 was, yeah, and that was a zirconia riser, which is,
kind of heavy anyway.
Yeah, one of the more denser woods that we use in handles.
So it'll definitely add some mass weight. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, no, I love it. I'm a huge fan of it so far.
It's going to take 3 of us to hold it up on a saw and try to cut some handle blanks out of it.
Well, man, Cody, I appreciate you going through all this work. We joke around and stuff, but I appreciate you doing all this, and I also appreciate Aron breaking it down so I can understand it.
It was good.
Yeah,
fun work.
I'm here for the redneck demographic.
Well, me and Myles Blackwidow, we appreciate it too, because I'm not a good tester.
Our testing consists of standing on it, throwing it over the building, and running over it with a truck.
That sounds
I've seen that. That's pretty good.
And that is what happened to Rob's.
Well, I feel like we're pretty good at building them, but not very good at testing them. And
we can take care of that if that speeds up the iterative learning process. So the foam core next week, deeper hooks, maybe 2 months from now, we'll have you boys ready to go. Not super aggressive, just slightly. 7 feet per second more.
Every phone call I get for foam core tomorrow, I'm gonna keep track of and settle up with you when I see you.
I know.
Does that mean my
Roger's gonna hate our rotten guts?
My backup limbs just went from like 3 months out to 3 years.
Yeah.
Dang.
Yeah. Every phone call I get for foam core adds a day.
It's no big deal, Toby. It only allows you to hunt in various temperatures without changing your tune. That's not important to hunters. I can't see how you can apply that to marketing in any way.
That's right.
Whenever you get around to it.
No, we do. We appreciate you guys putting forth the effort and doing the testing because that's definitely out of my league, and so we appreciate it.
One thing I wanted to bring up before we get off, and Cody, kind of going off of what Cody had talked about earlier, Cody and I aren't paid by Blackwidow. I obviously have shot about 14 bows or whatever it's been in the last couple months. Whatever bow, obviously Cody and I are big fans of Blackwidow, but there's a reason. I try to test as much stuff just like Cody as I can to help people make decision, but I would hope that with Cody and I testing other bows that specifically, Cody, he kind of makes a living at this or it's got the Tradlab. There's a reason why there's a lot of dead animals with a Widow and why Cody prefers them is they're just, if not the best, one of the better bows, what I would consider the best custom made bow. So it's not a matter of favoritism. You're going to favor the best. And it's not for any other reason than the bow is just that good. And so, I would hope by people seeing us test as many other bows as we do, and speaking highly of other bows as well, that you would know with this podcast and that it's not a biased opinion. It's just a good product.
We appreciate that. We really do.
I try to tell people that when they say I show favoritism, this exact PMA bow has been in about 8 large tests. So the bowyers that get favoritism get the crap tested out of their equipment, and it gets published to everybody without them having any input to it. This is the first test where a bowyer had input to the test. And those bows, the bows that rise to the top get tested more. And you guys definitely build good, consistent bows as we saw in those mass measurements. So you're adding value for folks for their dollar. There's no doubt about that.
Yep. We appreciate it.
I wasn't speaking for Cody there. Well, I was, but not in his words, my own, because what he does, he puts a lot of effort in for very little return for this. And I've had guys mention a couple times that he favors a couple bows, which I'm very defensive of Cody on that. And it's like, look, you go test everything, then slick, and then let me bitch at you, because good things come to the top. I mean, the cream rises to the top. So there's a reason favoritism is there. It's because it's good. So it's not favoritism. It's just because the products is a good one to test. So, and I did the other day, I said, hey, who's going to win my bow review? It was 1,689 votes. Widow was first. The next one below was 600. So the one below that was 300 votes. So 1,689 people picked Widow to win over the other competitors. That wasn't me. That's just what they chose. So that goes to show, obviously, you guys have a very good name, and that doesn't have shit to do with me. That was just me throwing a poll up. So I just said poll now. Jesus.
I was going to point that out.
You can't make fun of me. I said it first.
Oh, that's good stuff.
No, yeah. Thanks, guys. Cody, Aron, thank y'all very much. And, Toby, Myles, thank y'all. I know Rob and I are excited to have them, and I've really liked it to this point, and I don't see that changing. So,
well, we certainly appreciate it. We really do.
Is that all we got, guys?
Yeah.
I believe they wrapped it
Did
up.
me kissing your guys' did me kissing your ass that last couple minutes like speed up the limbs? Did that bring anything back after the foam core?
It helped.
Might have gained a day.
All right.
You gained a day.
You guys are both fine looking gentlemen, disease free.
They look identical.
I don't know. Myles is a bit skinnier than Toby. I don't know about identical.
Dude, you kill me.
He is that.
Well,
yeah, that's all I've got. Cody, Aron, Rob, y'all got anything else y'all want to add?
I'm good, man. I feel
good.
like school's out. I'm out of here, bro.
It's past my bedtime.
Stop recording. You got to be careful. I thought we were off the air already. You got to be really careful because they'll keep that thing going.
Hells yeah.
I can blackmail you.
Yeah. Everyone gets real quiet so we can start talking shit to one another, and then we wait for that mic to turn off.
All
Go to bed, guys. Thanks.
right. You guys take her easy.
See you.